As a roofer, you need accurate roof measurements and you need them fast. GAF Quick Measure gives you single-family residence roof measurements in less than an hour. Learn more and order your first report today at gaf.com/quickmeasure.
1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men are survivors of sexual abuse or assault. That means you or someone you know has survived an external and internal battle for your soul, which most often no one else will ever see, unless you tell your story. This is Journey On, Survivors Healing from Sexual Abuse and Assault. My name is DJ Burr, and I'm a survivor. I was molested at 16 years old and raped at 18. I didn't know what surviving looked like back then, but I do now. Join me as I talk with survivors and hear their experience, strength, and hope on the road to recovery. Hear our stories and share your own. You are not alone. Welcome to another episode of Journey On. I'm DJ Burr, and today I am speaking with David Devore. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, I'm so excited that you are here with me to talk about your experience, strength, and hope around childhood sexual abuse and assault, and also shame, because I know that's an important topic for you and one that you do a lot of work around. So I'm sure our audience will love to hear everything that you have to share. So please tell us about yourself, where you're currently located, your age, and you can go right into your story.
Perfect. Well, my name is David Lohman Devore, and I'm 49 years old, and I live in Chicago, Illinois. And about 6 years ago, at the age of 43, I found myself in this sort of midlife crisis mode, where I recognized that the strategies that I had developed in my life just weren't working for me anymore. I felt like I was kind of walking on the parameter of my life. Like I wasn't really showing up, and I wanted to become more authentic, transparent in my experience, and it really was just a big question mark. Why am I feeling so stuck in my life? And I felt like I was stuck in many areas, including intimate relationships, my career, ability to make money. I felt like I was just walking on the parameter and not fully dipping into my life, and I wanted to go deeper. And this really prompted for me a deeper spiritual journey. I just made it my quest to figure out what was going on, why I was feeling stuck, and to just go deeper in my life. So I began my journey just by kind of looking around my physical surroundings, because I was really feeling somewhat overwhelmed and anxious in that moment. And I remember waking up one morning and I just felt like I was almost having an anxiety attack, and I was looking around the house. And I'd been in a relationship with a man for 10 years, and we bought a house together, and we had a bunch of stuff. And I recognized that there was a part of me that felt like the things themselves, the relationship, that those things were sort of my identification, that they were like my experience. I also knew that I wasn't up there. And I knew that my first step was going to be to leave, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever done and one of the most liberating things. So I go to a hypnotherapist for assistance with this, and he creates this hypnotherapy tape for me, where I begin to imagine that I put all of the objects and the things and my partner and everything in this hot air balloon, and it sails over the ocean, and it disappears, and I walk into my free and new life in some ways. And it actually really worked for me. And in fact, in my coaching work, I use a lot of visualization like this. So I end up moving in with a friend, and I stay on a hot air bed. I bring just a few things with me, and in that moment, for the first time, I recognize that this is just me. There's nothing to blame on the outside. There was a lot of blame that I was putting onto my partner and into the outside world, and I knew that by sort of liberating myself from the things, that I really could focus on myself. And being sort of overwhelmed by all of it, the most logical place to start for me was within my physical body. And I started to experiment with different cleanses, different ways of eating, and began to view myself sort of as the science experiment of David, because I recognized that there was something that felt very personal about all of my experiences, and I needed sort of an objective viewpoint. And I started viewing my body as sort of like the vehicle, like the car that I'm in my journey on it. It's a certain color, it's a certain size, shape, it's from a certain country, and all cars run on fuel. So I started thinking of it like, how do I fuel this vehicle so that I can become more conscious. And I found this really beautiful way that works very much for me that's very paleo-oriented. It's just very simple, whole, real meats and vegetables, nothing processed. And the fog started to clear for me after a couple of weeks. I felt like I actually could see things that I wasn't seeing before. Synchronicities were more apparent to me. And even just going outside, looking around, I noticed things in nature that I hadn't noticed. And I could really see that by fueling myself differently, that there was some healing that was happening within my body and that I was becoming more conscious. And I also started a hot yoga practice, which was life-changing for me, which is my daily kind of spiritual mind, body, and spirit practice. And I started meditating, which, to be honest, in the very beginning, I felt being overwhelmed. I felt very anxious about being with myself in meditation with my eyes closed because of my thoughts. And I recognized right away I was sort of identified with the thoughts. So if I was having negative thoughts in my meditation, I identified with them. And as I meditated longer and over more time, I began to recognize that I wasn't my thoughts. And I began to see that the judgments that I had about myself were causing a lot of suffering for me. So I kind of created this vantage point for myself to go deeper just in my physical body. And it's incredibly useful as a wonderful first place to start wherever you are in your journey. I think that if you address the physical body first, that you can create a very neutral sort of space from which to go deeper and to go deeper into the work. So, of course, I'm exploring all kinds of new thought, new philosophy, following gurus, reading books, going to workshops. And I end up in India at a very intensive spiritual retreat at Oneness University. It's a retreat of awakening. It's people from all over the world, all different cultures, different religions, all coming together in this white temple down in the middle of India. The teachings there are completely transcendent. It's really the idea that, on the planet Earth, we're just one big tribe. We're a part of this organism. We each have a function in it. And I came to see the ways that I judged myself, especially growing up in the Catholic Church and being gay. And the light bulb started turning on for me. I began to see that based in the experiences of my life, that I felt this sense of separation from my own God, who I believed was judging me and sending me to hell for being gay. And that I believed on some level, unconsciously, that the people around me were in somewhat rejection of me in my sexuality. And, the retreat itself was just relentless rituals, teachings, yogas, new practices. It literally was from 6 in the morning till late in the night every single day. And by getting in that practice every day, I felt myself really starting to snap out of it. The questions that I had about being stuck I started to feel like I was getting some answers around that. My intention going there, really, I remember on the airplane very specifically saying, I need to snap out of it. I need to wake up. I need to become more present, and I need some sort of healing, but I don't even know what that means. So it would get even deeper for me. Nothing about sexual abuse for me came up when I was in India, but when I got home from India, I went to see my mother, and ironically, she had discovered while I was in India that I had been sexually abused as a child when I was 13 by a priest. And this was something I did not want my mother to know about. I thought it would rock her spiritual world. And in fact, she had actually asked the priest to become friends with me because my father was emotionally unavailable, and she thought that I could really use some sort of a paternal force in my life. And so, of course, finding out about it, she felt incredibly betrayed, and she felt that, that she had actually put me in a negative situation, and she was very, very upset about it. And being sort of in this spiritual state coming back from India, I was able to really sit with her and listen to her, be very angry at all of her emotional content around it. Whereas in the past, I would have wanted to just run away from that conversation. She asked me a bunch of questions. And it's interesting because after she asked me a lot of questions, she looked up at me and she said, David, you answered these questions exactly the way that they said that you would. You answered them exactly like an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And when I first heard the word sexual abuse, for me, it just did not fit. I was like, no, you've got this wrong. I was not sexually abused. in my mind, when I was 13 years old, I was having my first relationship with a man who just happened to be an adult Catholic priest. I would have done anything for him. I loved him. And the idea of sexual abuse just didn't fit, because in my mind, my thought about sexual abuse was always around someone being forced, someone being raped, someone being abducted in some way. There being some really dramatic events around that. And so sexual abuse didn't fit for me. So at the end of the conversation, she had already reported him to the church, and this is 30 years later. And she had reported him to the church, and she suggested very strongly that I do the same thing. And I said, absolutely not. There is no way that I'm going to report that man. I mean, what is he going to do? He's getting close to retiring. Will the bishop take care of him? What is going to happen to this man? I was still in so much denial, and I felt fully responsible for him. But after a couple of months of thinking about it and the urging of my mother, I decided that I would have a meeting with an advocate from the diocese who handles sexual abuse cases. And after I talked to her for about an hour, it's like somebody hit me over the head. The priest is still working with children, and even though I was in denial of my own situation in sexual abuse, I thought that for another child, it may be a different experience. So I agreed to do this report, which was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. Answering questions about, the actual sexual content of what was going on between us. I ended up going down to the diocesan headquarters and met with a group of 12 representatives of that community who were essentially evaluating the truthfulness of my story. And I'll never forget this. When I got to the Catholic Church, and by the way, I'm not Catholic anymore, but I walk into the school and smell the holy water, and immediately I start to have symptoms of how shame shows up for me, something that I was completely unaware of. In the past, I would think of my shame symptoms as being anxiety. But for me, I begin to feel sort of flushed. The hair on the neck stands up a little bit. I feel like I'm small, like 6 inches small, 13 years old. I feel like I'm going to the principal's office, like I've done something wrong. There's something bad. And I remember just walking up the stairs with the advocate, looking at my feet, and walking into this very small room with a big oval table, and everyone jumps up, and it's like deer in the headlights. There's a lot of fear in the room. People are shaking my hand. They're asking me all kinds of little superficial questions about my trip and about Thanksgiving that was coming up. And my heart was just racing. I was looking around the room like, how do I get out of this room? Like, where's the nearest exit? I need to escape this situation. I don't want to be here. So they tell me that they've never had a living person come up against a priest in a report like this, and they just asked me to tell my story. And the first thing that I tell them, the first thing that comes into my mind is that I am feeling really vulnerable because I am an openly gay person, and in the Catholic Church, being gay is a sin, a mortal sin that you would go to hell for. And there's this whole sort of feeling that, that rehabilitation needs to occur for a gay person. So I was feeling vulnerable coming into the conversation. I end up telling the story, and in my mind going into it, I imagine that I just beautifully tell the story and I'm able to answer the questions. But I immediately am feeling this tremendous emotion around it, and I'm crying, and it's very difficult, and the questions are hard for me, and I'm really, really struggling in this interview. And as the interview is going on, about an hour into it, I can really see the light in each of these people's eyes. Like, they're really with me. They're really supporting me. And by the end of it, they unanimously are with me, because ultimately it's coming down to my word against the priest's word in this situation. And I recognize coming out of that meeting that, and being emotionally connected to the pain of what the sexual abuse had been for me, that time I was able to admit to myself that, yes, this is true. I was sexually abused. And this was a really powerful moment for me. And I think this is why it's so important for people who have been abused, to, when you come to this moment, to begin to tell the story. If it begins with friends that you feel safe with, or your family, or anyone that you feel comfortable with, that as we tell our story, and this is true for me even now in this moment as I'm talking about it, that the healing just goes deeper and deeper the more we are able to have a voice about what happened. Because for many of us, it feels like we've been silenced and our power has been taken away. So that first experience was very powerful for me. The priest is actually not in the priesthood. People always ask me this question. He was taken out of the priesthood for non-compliance to the bishop's wishes. It really wasn't because of the sexual abuse, but he was just unwilling to cooperate and remains in the community where he served. The community formed a circle around him. They bought a house for him. They tied yellow ribbons on the trees down there, and are trying to get him back in the priesthood. They're trying to go over the bishop's head. And this is where I just leave that part of the story behind, because I consider this now in my spiritual journey to just be the variables of the narration of my story, because it doesn't, for me, it isn't nearly as important what happened with him as much as what happens next, which is really about the healing that I began to have around all of this. The Catholic Church offers me 3 years of therapy that they would pay for. And when I first saw that letter, I was like, oh my gosh, no. I mean, I became a therapist when I was 30. I just did not want to do psychotherapy. I knew that I needed something a little out of the box. And so I was looking for a spiritual healer, a spiritual counselor, and I was given a recommendation, and I met a woman in California who I started doing sessions with over the phone, and I knew she was my girl. We just clicked, and it was just magical. And right away, we start to go deeper, and this is really where the journey expands for me. I came to see really quickly that I had a really strong case of shame. And shame is a word that I was avoiding for a lot of my life. My mother had sent me a book by John Bradshaw in my 20s because she recognized that I may be struggling with shame because of my sexuality. And I looked at that book, and it just made me feel nauseous. I felt very resistant to it because the person who I was showing up as, the egoic mask that I was wearing to survive my life, was proud gay David. And so there could be no shame in it at all. And I began to see that within my own mind, that the survival sort of primitive mind that we all have, that's very important in terms of surviving our physical life, is also operating to protect us from experiences of shame and unworthiness that we tend to repress, but still are playing out unconsciously in our lives. And I could really see that based in these experiences that I felt fully responsible for what happened with this priest. I felt like I corrupted God. I felt like my God was judging me double time because not only was I gay, but that I had corrupted a man of his, this spiritual authority. And the priest really continued to engage me and make me feel like it was my fault, and would sometimes sit down with me and ask me why it is that when we get together that we end up in his bedroom. And I would just cry because I didn't understand, and I wanted so much for him to love and accept me. It became, I felt like I was in love with him. And on occasion, I would become so upset around the sexual content that I would start to cry, and I would just beg him to hear my confession. And he was the only one I could turn to. He was the only one who could liberate me from my sins of the sexual abuse, which I now see was spiritual abuse, which had been incredibly damaging to me in terms of the person that I came to believe that I was. And I began to see that shame is that voice within our head that is very negative. It's the voice that says, I can't do it. I don't deserve it. I'm unworthy of it. It's different than guilt, as Brené Brown says so beautifully in her shame work. Guilt is episodic. I did something. It's out there, and I can fix it. But shame is, I am something wrong. I am bad. I'm flawed. I'm defective. And I came to see that this egoic survival mind of mine had created this false person, this optimistic, happy-go-lucky, proud gay David, that wasn't really authentic. And it was giving me this sense of disconnect in my life. And I started to view shame as sort of like the bully on the playground. And, like when you're a kid and there's a bully out there who's after you, the minute they see you, they have a million really negative things to say about you. And it creates this sort of fight or flight instinct within us. And I think that as children, the shame that we experience in sexual abuse creates this sense of disconnect, and we have to find strategies to survive it. So for me, the primary strategy of survival came down to pretending that everything was okay, running and not looking back. I kept myself very busy as a child. I had lots of activities, lots of ways of distracting myself. And that can also show up in numbing, being, on social media all the time, or numbing by alcohol or drugs, or avoiding life, avoiding that bully on the playground, trying to numb it out, trying to avoid it. And that had been a primary strategy for me. And that strategy that tends to emerge, and I think this is very common, and this was in my experience as well, is that all of this internalized, often unconscious shame is sort of brewing within, and it tends to come out in the form of blame, like where it's the outside world's fault. It's the people out there. And in LGBTQ, in terms of homophobia, there tends to be a focus on the external world out there. And we hear this all the time. I mean, a lot of people are very fixated on the outside world and blaming outward. And it really is a manifestation of this unresolved shame within. Other strategies include anger and projection of anger and violence in some cases, where a person's shame is so incredibly great that it's almost like a tea kettle that is being heated and it is about ready to erupt. And it expresses itself often in really violent and angry behavior. And I did a really interesting exercise when I was at a retreat at the Hoffman Institute. We got to a portion of the retreat where we were dealing directly with shame, which they call the censor. There are many names for shame. And they had us draw a picture of it, which mine was like this monster with sharp teeth. And I imagined that it was like a bit on my shoulder that had grown a face and a mouth and starts talking really negative to me. And they give you a wiffle ball bat and you bash it out. You express all of your anger, all of your emotion toward it. You tell it how it's ruined your life, what it's done. And you do this for an hour. And by the end of it, I was crying and I was screaming. And it was this tremendous release, another emotional connection for me to this emotional pain that I had had. And at the end of it, I thought, okay, good. It's gone. I felt completely expanded. I felt like, I've taken care of it. I felt really relieved. I thought, wow, this is a great retreat. And then the teacher very quickly gathers us all around and he says, okay, so you guys did a great job. It was a great commitment. I just want you to know that voice of shame is going to grow back. It's going to come back and you're going to need to just get a wiffle ball bat and keep beating it down when it does. And that's exactly what I did. That became a part of my personal practice, was to kind of beat it down. And it was a really gestalt and wonderful way of connecting to the emotion. And I still use that sometimes, and I think it can be very effective. For a lot of other people who may not be as conscious of the way that shame is playing out in their life, they may not have strategies to handle it. And this group of people are in the most risk of self-abuse, of self-destructive behaviors. And often they don't survive their shame. We call ourselves survivors of sexual abuse. And for people who aren't able to create strategies as children, they often take their own lives. And I think that this is really the tragedy that we see a lot in teenagers, and we see it a lot in LGBTQ, and separation.
Oh, David? Hello?
Yes?
Oh, the phone cut out.
Oh, it did? I'm sorry.
Oh, yep. So, maybe start. Yeah, I missed it. It was like for a few seconds. So if you wanted to start over where you're talking about like separation. Can you hear me? Oh. David?
Hello?
David.
Hi.
Hey, I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, I guess it looks like the call got dropped.
Yeah, it did. You were talking about separation, and then, hold on one second, on my phone. Apparently I brought my work phone home and didn't even know it. It started ringing right as... Oh, jeez. I'm sorry. Where is it? Let me turn that off. All right, so we can get back to it. You were talking about separation.
Okay, yes.
And so you can just pick up from there.
Okay, perfect. So for another strategy, well, actually, there's a whole group of people out there that, as children, are not aware of the shame enough to even develop a strategy, and these people are at the most high risk for self-destructive behavior, because the shame is literally festering inside and creates this sense of separation from other people, from the world around them, from their own higher power. And this isolation can create a lot of depression and anxiety. And we see this a lot in teenagers who have been sexually abused and in the LGBTQ community, where the shame is so great that the person ends up taking their own life. And we call ourselves survivors of sexual abuse because we literally have created strategies of surviving. And for some people who aren't able to do that, they end up taking their own lives. And I think that this is one of the biggest tragedies that can occur, is that it ultimately it can actually kill someone. And for me, the idea of shame, when I talk about separation, I think that we're born into our bodies, and the first 5 years of our life are pretty great because we are sort of these open vessels. We're fully creative. We are in the moment. There's no present. There's no past. We're very emotionally present, and we create. We wear vibrant colors. We're not afraid to be naked. The fear hasn't really arrived yet. And so often we want to return back to that state, and we love children for that reason. But shame is really born around the time that we're 5, 6, and 7, and it's born in comparison. So for the first time, there's a me and there's a you. And within that comparison, we begin to evaluate ourselves. And this usually happens in grade school when we're looking at other kids that are our own age. And it's based in variables like, I'm picked for the kickball team, or my teacher likes me, or the kids like me. And we begin to sort of evaluate ourselves on a continuum. And this becomes very powerful, these judgments that we have about ourselves in terms of where we fall on this continuum. And as we move through our life, programs literally are developed around this as we come to believe that we are the experiences that we've had. And the more separation that we feel, the more difficult the journey becomes. And when we're sexually abused, this increases the amount of shame. And for many people, this sense of unworthiness puts us on the lower end of this continuum. And even though we've created these strategies to survive our life, our egoic survival mind, which is really here to protect us in our life, is also protecting us from these experiences of shame and repress them and are protecting them like gargoyles. And I kind of, in my own mind, imagine that I pushed down all of these experiences and I put them into this dark room that I created that could not be present in my life because I can't show up with all of that pain. I have to show up as being happy, optimistic David. And this creates this tremendous sense of disconnect that many people feel as they enter their adult life, which led me right into my midlife crisis, where I said, okay, I need to know what this is all about and why I am the way that I am. And when it comes to midlife, I think that we all enter that at a certain point, but there is a point in life where we begin to question everything for its truthfulness, for its authenticity. And the work that I did with my spiritual counselor, Susie Lula from California, was very much about going back into all aspects of my life and coming to understand the way that this unworthiness and shame was playing out in my ability to have a real, strong, intimate relationship, to have the trust there, to go further in my career, to make more money. I was really holding myself back in unworthiness. And I came to see that there were a lot of beliefs that I had based in the shame and being sexually abused that were absolutely not accurate and were really stopping me from having a more joyful life. That I had literally become a slave to my brain in a lot of ways and was operating on automatic pilot based in these programs created by shame that was creating all of this disconnection for me and a tremendous amount of suffering, and that I was in survival mode. And I think that many people on the planet experience being in survival mode. And in fact, I would go to say that I believe that shame is an epidemic that is often untreated, because we are, in our survival, our mind is protecting us.
Are you there? Hello?
I'm here. Sorry about that.
Oh.
Darn.
What happened?
Let's see. How do I pick this up?
And we're at 30 minutes.
Okay. Let's go to... Do you want to...
Well, did you want to finish?
Am I talking?
Did you want to finish your thought before you?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. And I'm going to edit it.
Okay. So I think that shame is a real epidemic on the planet that often goes untreated, because our egoic survival mind is protecting us from all of these places that feel small and unworthy, and it's difficult to show up in life with this emotional pain. So our mind is protecting us from it and creating this sort of egoic mask that we wear that can create this sense of disconnection. And that's exactly where I found myself at when I was 43 years old and in this midlife crisis and beginning to question everything that I had learned. The spiritual journey for me has been amazing. I came to see that, through the help of my spiritual counselor, that, I had always imagined that voice of shame was something external to myself, that monster picture that I drew that I beat up, or the gremlins that Brene Brown talks about in her shame work. But truly, in terms of spiritual healing, what I came to see was that I had really abandoned the child that I was. I had left that child behind and created these survival strategies. And spiritual healing for me has been about going back to that child, going back to those experiences. And the strategy that never occurred to me in terms of handling shame was really about stepping up to that bully on the playground, that voice of shame, and embracing it. Because the truth really is that any bully on the playground, the bully of shame within ourselves, is really in need of love. And that's why they're projecting it out. So there was something really magical about coming to the understanding that I had left this child behind, and that I was the only one who could come to that child with love and come to those experiences and begin to embrace that child and embrace those experiences, which is very painful, and going back into the emotional content of what it was. But that the healing really, for me, was about recognizing that I had judged myself very harshly around these experiences and repressed them. And by shining some light of my own love in those experiences and coming back to that child and getting back into a conversation with the child that I was, that this is where the healing really happened. And I used to imagine, and I still do, this has become a part of my practice, that I sit with the child that I was when I was 13, and I am the adult, and I look at him and I ask him what he needs from me now, what I can do for him now. And what always comes up is the child will say, I want you to stop judging me. I want you to love me. I want to be able to be emotionally free. I want to be able to be authentic. And I recognize that I, in order to survive, had learned to pretend to be that everything was okay, and that I was doing a real disservice to myself. So the magic in all of it really is very much like, I think of this as like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Like Dorothy enters the Wizard of Oz. She has this really big journey. She's looking everywhere for a way home, and she makes friends and enemies, and she's struggling. And at the end of the movie, Glinda tells her, she says, you don't need to go to Oz. You don't need to find the wizard. The answers are within you. All you have to do is tap your heels 3 times. And that there's a real magic when we come to understand that we truly are here to embrace and heal ourselves. and that we have the power to do that healing, and that it's happening within. And so for me, that has been really the magic of the story, was that recognition. And beyond that, it becomes a practice. I used to want it to be like Linda, where there's this magic wand and then it's over. But really, it's just like coming, the spiritual practice is about coming to that child every day and asking that child how I can be present. And when the shame comes up, which it still does for me a lot, it's about being able to be present for it, not trying to run away from it, not expressing it in anger or blame, but really to sit with it and say, okay, I'm here. I'm not running away. I'm going to sit with myself until it passes, and I'm going to love myself. And so for me, the journey has really been about that and about reconnecting in that way.
Wow. I'm really glad that you have been able to bring such a wealth of information to the audience, because you nailed shame as I see it. You talked very openly and candidly about your experience with shame and how you work with it, and it's very similar to mine. And, sometimes my inner child really just wants to have fun, because in my experience growing up in an abusive household, fun had to stop.
Right.
There was no fun. There was caretaking. There was preparing for the next big, fight or argument or abusive event. And so I have to take some time, most often, to just have fun. But it involves talking to my inner child. And so
exactly.
for you, I'm curious, what would you say, and what have you said to that little kid who was 13 years old having the relationship with the grown man? Have you been able to reach him to see what he needs from you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, it's really about, a part of it is when I see the struggle that child was having, and when I'm in conversation, the shame is really born in what I said, that the child that I was believed that it was his fault and believed that he was defective. And my role as coming to myself and embracing myself is to always reassure the child that I was that it was not his fault. And that he was in a situation where there was a huge power differential, and that he had really been taken advantage of, and to be able to just sit with that with him without trying to talk him out of it, trying to reason, but to just be really present to the child that I was, and just hold him and allow him to be whatever is happening. And I find that this ebbs and flows. I do have days that I feel much stronger impulses of shame. And to be really honest, when, there's a little part of me, there's a little shame voice within me that as I'm coming forward with this work that says, who are you to be doing this work? You know what I mean? And that is the voice of shame. And whenever I am, going to put out a video or talk about it, even today, I had this little moment that I was like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? You shouldn't, why do you have the right to speak? You know what I mean? And I just have to sit with it and say, I see you. I know exactly why you feel that way.
Right.
This is part of your programming. This is part of the situation. And it really is about almost stepping out of myself and looking at myself from above and saying, wow, this being in this vessel, this mind and this body can be rough. It's tough to be a human being. There are a lot of things that are happening in your mind that are not accurate. And I'm just going to sit with you, and I'm going to love you, and I'm going to have this deeper appreciation for the physical body that I am and the mind, and say, yeah, this really sucks for you right now, but it will pass, and I will wait, and I will sit with you, and I will allow this to be here until it passes. And that's been the magic for me.
I have a very similar experience whenever I am receiving an email from someone who wants to be on the show, or I'm reaching out to someone who I would like to be on the show. It's like this voice, the inner child really is like, you're not capable of doing this. And I think what I take from that is the fear of continuing to go into it, to talk about it.
Right.
And so we have to talk about it. We have to continue to have these conversations. And I have thoroughly enjoyed the process of creating this podcast and reaching out to men all over the world to talk about healing from childhood sexual abuse and or assault. And I still have those moments of shame where that voice says, no, don't do it. You can't do it. Let's not talk about it. Right. And so it's like, I just got to go a little deeper. Right. But I have to be gentle too. So one of the things that I have to do is make sure that, maybe I space out my interviews, because it can be overwhelming not to just hear someone else's story, but to relive the experiences in my own body as maybe I'm hearing something that someone else is sharing that I can directly connect to.
Yes, exactly. I'm so with you on that. And in fact, I would say that another part of this work for me and my own experience has been around when we hear other people's stories, shame can come right in the back door again with what I call comparative victimhood, where I hear someone else's story and their story may be really horrific and dramatic at a very young age, including physical, sexual abuse every day, even by their parents. And when I hear someone else's story, a lot of times the voice of shame will come into my mind and say, you were not abused, David. He was abused. How dare you even call yourself a victim? That is a voice that will really come into my mind, because the idea of sexual abuse, or my judgment around it, would be that it would have to be something really extreme. And this created this sense of resistance for me to my own healing. And I think that this topic can be so hot for so many people that this resistance will occur. It's exactly why I was blinded to this. I thought of myself as being this, intellectual therapist, and that I knew myself really well. And it literally blinded me. It literally shaded my perspective. Yeah. So I think it's really important to take that into consideration, because there's so many shades of gray in everything. And that's so true in sexual abuse as well, that many people are being held back from their healing because they will say it wasn't as bad as his.
Exactly.
That my experience wasn't as bad. Therefore, he needs healing, but I don't, right? It's like it creates that more separation, and it just comes in the back door.
And so what I tell people is, like, your story is your story. Do not compare it to anyone else's.
Exactly.
We all have similar experiences, but we each have our own story. And it does no good for anyone to compare those stories, because what ends up happening is that if we're stuck in comparing our stories, we're not sharing, we're not healing, and we're also not helping others heal. The process becomes stalled. And I think that's why we have a problem in this country and throughout the world of talking about men being victims of sexual assault or rape. People don't want to face that. They don't want to know that that's true, or they have had similar experiences and they're in the process of judging, and it just stalls the conversation. So that's why I'm really glad that we've been able to connect and talk about our challenges and our hopes, right? We still have hopes. We still dream. We have visions. You can have that too if you're still someone out there who is struggling to tell your story. If you can't tell your story to another person, write it down, right? That's another way you could do that.
Oh, I agree. That's a really good starting point. It's just to write it all out.
Yeah, journal, right? It could be a one line, a line a day. It could be a line a week. Whatever you need to help you move through it is just to begin to tell the story. And, we've heard so many stories on the Journey On podcast that are so similar. And, we've been able to talk to people who have also gone through what you call religious abuse. And that is such a prevalent issue. And we have to continue to have conversations about that too. When another person treats you as if they can do no wrong and they're an adult and they're looking down on a child, and that child does not know that that adult is fallible, that can be considered as spiritual abuse, right?
Yes. Oh, definitely. And it's really incredibly painful. I think that that's something that's really overlooked, is what that spiritual abuse would feel like, because we tend to look at the physical aspect of, when it comes to sexual abuse. And for me, it was really coming to terms with what that had meant for me, and that it literally created a separation between me and my own higher power, who in my mind was sitting in judgment of me and sending me to hell. And that's a lot for a child to handle. That's a lot for a child to believe that the world and the higher power itself is against them.
Absolutely.
That can all come out of this, and that's, this is where, like I said before, that a lot of kids don't survive it because it's too much, it's too overwhelming, and it's showing up in depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation and often suicide.
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, the message I heard was, I brought you in this world and I can take you out of it. For me, there was no higher power than that. So my childhood was spent, being scared that, you could kill me, and you've tried, right? To my parents, and it was in fear. So when this idea of having a higher power that was greater than that was like, no, that's not possible. But I'm so grateful that I've been able to connect with a power that is greater than all of that, because that was madness. And my higher power in our relationship is full of joy and love and compassion and respect and authenticity. And that's something I hope that everyone can strive to have in their relationship with a power greater than themselves, whatever that is.
Yes, exactly. I'm so on the same page with you. I literally had to recreate my idea of a higher power because mine was showing up as this judgmental man with white hair and a beard that was sitting on a cloud and looking down at me. And it really required that I begin to question the truthfulness of those thoughts around the higher power, and I recognized how much suffering it was causing me. So it's taken me some time to recreate that to a higher power of love and compassion that is living within me and that is a part of this world, that is breathing in this world, and that is everything. And it's really interesting because there's this whole idea out there, I think, that that we have been created as children of God, but I really believe that we create our idea of God to be an image of us, and that it often falls short because human beings have judgment, and God does not have judgment. God is the higher power. It is love. Right. And we give it the limitations of our own mind, and that was causing me a lot of suffering. So my new creation of God is love, and there isn't a human mind in it. There isn't a judgment in it. And so that has been incredibly profound for me in my own journey.
I love it. I'm curious what your relationship with your mom is like now that she put it out there to you. Hey, you're sounding like a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Like you're an adult survivor of abuse. What is your relationship like now?
Well, I'll tell you, I've always had a close relationship with my mom and had this secret that I was keeping from her. And I will say that, there was a part of me that believed that she couldn't handle it. There was a part of me that thought, oh, she's too fragile. She's too weak. I'll never do this to her. And it's going to destroy her. Like I was worried about the emotional response that she would have. And I didn't want to create any pain for her. But what I discovered is that she's way more powerful and way stronger than I ever imagined. And it really created a much deeper dialogue in our relationship around all things that I found, that any of the places that I was pretending around her began to sort of dissipate once this big thing, the cat was out of the bag for me, that it just made my relationship with her deeper and better. And I'm so incredibly appreciative of that. And she's just really been with me and supports every step that I'm taking in this.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. Any other family members you're really close with that have been able to help you on this healing journey?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. My sisters both knew about this. I think I told them about it in my 20s. And, I also, I never even thought of it as being sexual abuse. I just told them that this is something that had happened. I think that part of my denial was that, I just chalked it off as being this childhood experience that happened. I wasn't, my mind was protecting me from it. So it wasn't giving it any power in terms of what it ultimately meant for me in terms of the shame. So I tended to be a little more casual in talking about it to some close friends. And my sisters have been right with me the whole time. And it was actually my older sister who ended up telling my mother about it. And this is what really, got everything moving for me. And I'm so grateful that she did. You know, I've had her promise never to tell my mom, and now looking back at it, I'm like, this was the best gift you could have ever given me, telling her, because it really forced me to look at this and to come, you know, to go deeper within myself and to begin to move into this pain with self-love and compassion, which was sort of a new concept for me, really.
Wow. So, yeah, I could understand being grateful to your sister for starting that process for you. Sometimes we do need other people to intervene on our behalves because we have blind spots.
Yes, and that's exactly what I felt. I felt blinded, completely blinded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was right there with you. I was 29 when I came to realize that, a 16-year-old doesn't have a relationship with a 45-year-old.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so you never know when those blinders are going to come off. So self-care is important. And I really appreciate you talking about what your self-care journey looks like and how it's unfolded. And I'm curious if you could give us, as we get prepared to close, if you could give us a couple tips what we can do to take care of ourselves when maybe we're triggered or we have recurring negative thoughts about ourselves or the experiences that we've had. What are one or two things that you could recommend?
Well, the first one that I would say, and this is around self-compassion, and which was sort of an ethereal concept to me in the beginning. Self-compassion for me is our ability to witness ourselves on this journey with a tremendous amount of empathy and recognizing that it's tough and that it can be really rough to be a human being, and that the impact of shame in these programs can create a lot of suffering for us. And one of the most magical exercises, which you probably have heard of, it's the Louise Hay mirror exercise. I have a little heart that I put on my mirror in my bathroom. And when I wake up in the morning, my practice is to look at myself in the mirror and to say, I love you whole and complete now. Which, of course, in the very beginning, I was completely resistant to, because the voice of shame comes up and says, what are you doing? You're 43 years old. Why are you telling yourself you love yourself? And I recognized it was hard for me to look at myself in that way. But this has become a real part of my daily practice, because as I did it every day and every night, I noticed that those voices began to dissipate and that I was more present. And I began to see that there was a being looking back at me in the mirror that was really had been trying to get my attention my whole life, the spiritual being that I am. And that for me is a way of connecting with that every day. It's something else that I think works really well is that when you're having a shame episode or when you're feeling really emotional about something, if you have a cell phone, I call it self-compassion selfie, but if you just shoot a little vid and let all of the emotional content out into the camera and let everything out about the situation, just really vent and express all of the emotions, and then set it down, take about an hour to walk away from it, and then come back to the video. And when you come back to it, if you can imagine that you are viewing it as if you're viewing your best friend, as if you're viewing someone who's in some sort of trouble. And it's so much easier for us to show up for our best friend and to be their cheerleader than to be our own cheerleader. But if you can come to this video and really witness and begin to reflect the emotional content as you watch it with the love and compassion that you would give a friend, then a lot of times you will get a lot of insight about what the next steps will be. But it begins with embracing the emotion and allowing it to be there. I know that for myself, the first time I did a video like that, my first thought was like, oh my gosh, you're being such a big baby about this, right? And so for me, it's been about being like, no, I am the only one who can come to my aid. I am the only one that can come to truly love myself, recognizing that I was looking for it everywhere out there in the world, just like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. And just to recognize that this is mine. This is a gift within myself to do this healing every single day.
Yeah, we are responsible for healing our pain, and we have to do the work. So
and no one else can do it for us.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your incredible journey and the tools of your recovery. I am grateful to you, and I'm sure our listeners are too. So thank you so much. And
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here, and it was so wonderful to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for joining me for this awe-inspiring episode of Journey On. I invite you to get in touch with me if you want to share your story. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at DJBurr1022 and on Instagram at TheDJBurr. Survivors are also welcome to join our private Facebook group, Journey On Survivors, at www.facebook.com/groups/JourneyOnSurvivors. And finally, the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person sharing them. Take what you like and leave the rest. I encourage survivors to share their stories authentically, and I believe every guest on my show has. I value the strength and courage it takes to publicly share our recovery journeys. Please respect yourselves and each other. Till next time, breathe deep and journey on.
Regina King for Cadillac Escalade.
Let's say you make it to the top. What's next? Relish in the glory of your accomplishments? Okay, sure, for a minute. But then you move forward. Take the 2021 Escalade. Cadillac's newest arrival is more than just a celebration of iconic luxury. It's the most technologically advanced Escalade ever. Because arriving is just the beginning.
The 2021 Cadillac Escalade. Never stop arriving.